How about for tonight, the fourth S? That is beyond the primary world of sustenance, shelter, and sex. And this is a little subtle. Don't let your, if you're still interested, let your little brain cut off right quick, because this is a subtle variation that points somewhere very specific. And it has to do, let me start putting it to you this way, that you could look upon the secondary world, assuming everyone has their own conception of what we have intended to mean by this description, as opposed to anything that would be absolutely, positively, unconditionally required for the basic maintenance of staying alive. You could look upon the secondary world as being a place of variety of the primary. Or, if you like, look at it as being a place of attempted variety of the primary. Now it succeeds, but as I start talking a little more, you might find it, in your own case, helpful to see that it does seem to be a kind of continuing struggle. You just never saw it this way. But look upon what we've been calling the secondary world, and even some of my references to Ecclesiastes in an askewed manner, and if you recall, at least twice I practiced and had the gesture of saying the secondary world like grows out of, expands, and blossoms from. But look at it another very specific way, because it is getting closer to the actual flow of energy as opposed to just a verbal description or any potential psychological detailing that you could make of it. And that is, the secondary world is the primary world with the continuing attempt to create a variety. But now face up to the mathematical, the quite materialistic, physical aspects that if we're dealing with the primary world, which has three aspects, let's just stay with that since we've been doing it, to keep humanity alive, to keep you as part of the human race alive. Sex, sustenance, and shelter. From those three, let's just say that's all it takes. From those three, the secondary world has got to grow. It is made up of those three energies, those three activities, those three aspects. But in what way? And what I'm going to suggest, if you look at it a certain way, is it becomes the attempt continually to create a variety of these three basic S's. Kinds of obvious examples should be that we've talked about before to get it started, that instead of, if we're dealing with the sustenance or just keeping the organism of you alive, instead of now being satisfied to go out and pluck and eat cold berries, it is now a matter of demanding hot blueberry crepes. And it's not an attack, there's nothing ridiculous about it. And yet, you can see that very basic foods, back to some of the old ideas of people wishing that they had been born inside of Henri Rousseau's overcoat and the noble savage and be a hermit and go back to the land. You could go back and eat the very kinds of things that we will assume, evolutionarily speaking, in the horizontal city sense, that man went through. Their kinds of stories. You could go back and replay a 7,000-year-old scenario in your life of being a gatherer. You could get out every day and hunt for berries and roots and leaves and suck on bark when you're in a tight. You could do that, and we'll assume live. We'll assume because that is what primary would be. But in any ordinary sense, you do realize, and it's not me just saying it to convince you, you need to begin to see that there is a subtleness to all growth. And it's not an attack either way. It's not one or the other is right. But there is a sweet subtleness to it that quite literally ordinary, civilized, intelligent, secondary people that which keeps life alive via man are those who would not settle for it. That if you said, listen, you people don't have to be yuppies. You don't have to suffer over yuppie depression and tiredness, whatever it was, that hip disease that came and gone before I could get it. What was it? You got real tired, nobody knew why except you were a yuppie, that you were upwardly middle class and you got real tired. But it wasn't because you were lazy or drank too much. No, it was something else. At any rate. And so it's no attack on that, but if you said, hey, you people could save your money, you don't need to be over here at this latest little place getting up on Sunday for brunch. Crepes. I know it's a nice little word, and I guess they taste good. But my God, instead of spending $10.95 for your Sunday brunch, if you go down the street to IHOP or down to the Huddle House, get pancakes. I mean, that's what they call them. They're a little fatter, you get more for your money, and you can get a stack of pancakes with blueberries, or at least blueberry syrup, for $1.99. But that is not the point, you see. Literally, it's not the point. And of course, there are all sorts of people. If I started something like this down in the city, there'd be all sorts of people say, well, that's a good idea. I'm on your side. Now you're up to something. Let's attack all these wise asses blowing their money on stuff like that. It's not. And it's not an individual choice in some way. It would be, as always, there's parts of life where I wouldn't bring it up and you wouldn't respond to it. There's still, as life grows, as life kind of does this number that we've talked, there are still parts of life that will attack, just like I was saying don't do, that will attack. And say, well, people are wasting their time. It gets less and less as things move in a certain way, as you should see, but sometimes the gradual lessening can take 3,000 or 4,000 years because it is still extant. There are still people around, they're of lesser consequence. Life needs them, obviously, in a lesser way, but there are people who would say what I'm doing, what I'm talking about, that will stand up and say, if anybody listens to them, that we're wasting. When are we worried about the deficit in the budget? And why are we worried about the lowering of incomes and the standard of living, when we have people, just what I said, if they were listening, say just what you said is a great example. There are people who will go out to some fancy-ass restaurant, they got ferns in the window and they got it all painted up, and people will go in there and say, I want some blueberry crepes. And what they're getting is pancakes, and they call them crepes, and they charge them 3 times too much. Of course, they could stay home and really save some big bucks. But at least go down the street, where down to Bombs or Pops or IHOP, and order some blueberry pancakes. Or really save some money, just order plain pancakes when they're not looking, get some of the grape jelly and just rub it on them. And they could very righteously say individuals who will go in there, they could stand. The person I'm speaking for generically is of little consequence, but the kind of person could stand there with you and me and say, what's the kind of people going in this fancy little place that's going to spend $10 for a stack of 99-cent pancakes? Watch them. And the person could stand there and start making sarcastic comments. They could say, all right, watch them. Here they come rolling up in a Mercedes. One of the great, some people have already pointed out, one of the great marketing coups of the world to convince Americans to spend $60,000 for cars that they use as taxis over in Europe. So this guy I'm speaking for could stand there and start picking on all the people going in here and saying, look at the cars they drive, look at their clothes, all of them wearing clothes. They got little ties, they got somebody's name, and none of the names say J.C. Penney. And so they're wasting money. It is not an individual choice of these people. They're not stupid. They are the advanced guard, at least in the city, of their generation. But you do understand that what can you do about food? What can you do about sex? What can you do about shelter? If those are the 3 building blocks you've got that you're going to play with, that's all you got. That's your erector set. What are you going to do? If life is going to be more interesting at the city level, all you can do is look for a variation of the 3. That's it. So you can have the people going out looking, insisting upon blueberry crepes instead of pancakes, instead of just cold berries that they pluck. You can have people saving, going into debt, so that they can be in a I'm helping with it pad instead of a lean-to, or perhaps get in a little S&M instead of the missionary position once a week. And it seems to be some kind of variety on the basis of those three. That is city life. That is a secondary world, more or less. We're getting to the fourth S. But that, with the ordinary existence of ordinary people, is about it. You should be able to feel it yourself. You've already been through it. You can search for something new to do. You can say that you're fighting ennui, boredom, disgust, tiredness with all of the activities of ordinary life, and that you want something greater. But ordinarily, what are you left with? Seeking a greater variety of those three. There is, as life expands through man, and specifically through man's higher part of the nervous system into the intellect, there is not only the continual striving, the pushing for a greater variety of those three, of the primary, but it even gets into a striving to expand the naming of it, to think up new ways to describe it, which is also one of the ways that faddish activity, just contemporary activity, can be a sitting duck of not just people eating crepes and paying 10 times too much instead of ordering pancakes, but of people using whatever the latest phrase is. Give me my space. You can say stuff like that with like a certain kind of sneer and get a laugh. You can get a laugh even from people who say that themselves. If they're around people that's going to laugh, they'll go ahead and laugh too. And they don't really know why. But it is a striving even past the point of variety. You're getting into the area closer to what I'm about to pull out of the fourth S, but of even renaming. That it's like, if I cannot come up with a new variety, if I can't come up with a new variation of this, one of the three primary, I'll just change what I call it. I say, some guy says that, who knows? It just seems to suddenly, in Southern California, it's this new term. Like a virus that sweeps the country, and everybody's saying, I don't know. I like, sex is still interesting to me, and I enjoy going out, but I got to have my space. And suddenly everybody knows what the hell it means. Of course, you could be, again, one of these lesser critics of life and say, I'll tell you what it means. It means nothing. That's what it means. But you miss the point again if you were that kind of person, or his partner. You miss the point. It does mean something. It's like running up to the edge as far as some group, or even an individual. I assume that you're with me. We don't even consider the possibility that there is somebody living down in South Orange County that makes up one individual. All of these terms, I don't think. Life does it, and it just comes out. But it's as though, along certain lines, within a certain time and spatial frame, along certain lines, it's like, let's talk about sex, since that was the basis of give me my room, or I got to have my own room, my own space. It's like going from sex into romance. So we already got into the secondary world. The variety. There's not just falling down in the missionary position and doing it, as Kinsey and Masters and Johnson says that the average man, whatever it is, 57 seconds. That it's like, well, I got to have something to do in life. And so people say, well, let's dress up. We'll play doctor. Got the whips and chains. It's like, do something, so we got to kill time. We've already eaten. We've paid the rent on our hip pad. What are we going to do for the rest of the month? We got sex, and of course we got to eat again tomorrow. We'll try to find a new place. I hear there's a place that has some kind of new form of crepes. But until then, let's do something sexual. So it becomes romance, is what I mean by romance. In other words, it's not just sex, not raw, primary sex. So it becomes romance. But then it's as though romance, in this particular time and place, let's just say Southern California so that you don't miss what I'm saying, but that's not important. It's like along certain lines that this kind of romance went as far as it will go. That is, the variety of sex run along this variation line. And so then, it's almost like a stopgap measure that people just come up with a new term for it. I'm heavy into relationships, See, now they're talking about secondary already, not sex. The guy's or woman, but he's not saying, boy, I'm heavy into, pounding it to her. I'm more than that into relationships. Since I've gotten a little bit older, got my own Mercedes, I've been through analysis. Well, I read a book on it. But now I'm more into relationships. And I feel like, in a sense, that I can be closer to women. That I'm not as hostile toward my mother and etc. But still, and it's like that's gone as far as it can, and suddenly a whole group of people are saying, but I still got to have my space. And suddenly, millions of people, that's what I've been looking for. That's what I wanted to say. And again, do you follow out what I'm trying to point out? I could speak for a part of last body and say, give me a break. They're doing it again. That doesn't mean anything. It's just babble. It's some kind of Southern California babble to say, give me my space. No, it's just some guy saying, hey, don't bug me, or I don't like women. What I'd like to do is 57 seconds and get out of here. But don't say all this. Well, I think we all need our space, baby. You need to follow your own muse. I need a certain amount of space. Some smart aleck, that is, some part of life's body that is still a little bit behind, could say, look, I'd like to get in here. Maybe I can run it up to 90 seconds. And then I'd like to get out of here and go out to the bar and be with the guys and talk about baseball or something. But it's as though it ran as far as it could along that line, and then the description, the verbalization of it in the secondary world becomes a new part of the expansion. That was a little off of where I'm sure you wanted us to go. There is also, as long as we're off the track, you might note, again, there's a certain way to measure, another kind of measurement of how civilized a group is, an individual or a collective group, a city, a civilization. Is to see the degree to which they are collectively, is what you need to look at, are collectively trying to create variety in primary activities. If you got any doubt, using a hard-wired springboard that's in all of our lifetimes right now, is look at the political structures of places on this planet that is part of life's body, part of life's own life, that are referred to as repressive regimes, tyrannical governments. The good old Eastern Europe prototype before the last year. There was almost no variety, literally, all the way from very mundane things such as soap and toilet paper to music, art, and of course political activity. But variety is at a minimum. And they don't really know why. But that is a part of life's body that is not very actively engaged in growth, which shouldn't come as any surprise. Assuming you can get away from ordinary induced ideas of politics, such as you people being from this part of the world, and say, well, yeah, that's because God intended everybody to live under a democracy or at least a republic, and those people are just going against God's will. I'll assume I'm not having to deal with peckerheads like that, and you assume that you don't have to. That is, within the confines of your own closet. It's not that, although there's some validity to that. That's just playground talk. But when life is not growing, when life is not becoming more civil, when life is not becoming more of a secondary manifestation in some area, you will find a glaring lack of variety in all things. Now back to the major path. Along with the three S's, the basic three S's, tied to, parallel with, and forms beyond any three-dimensional description is a fourth S, which is now man's neural need for stimulation. Neural stimulation, not sexual stimulation. Just consider the three basic S's that we've already covered, and we can just refer to them as that for the time being. The fourth S is neural stimulation. It is now perhaps well described to start with, it is like a tug of war. It is like a seesaw that is going on between the pursuit at the level we've already been talking about for the last 20 minutes, between the pursuit of variety in the primary affairs, just to keep making that expand. It's almost as though you had now some sort of tussle, to use Mississippi military talk. There's a kind of tussle between this, which still affects everyone, of seeking variety in primary affairs. Between that and the still developing, nascent, young intellect of man and its need for a food of stimulation. And like with almost everything else that you should notice by now, it's almost as though humans, ordinary people, will try almost anything to keep from facing directly this new responsibility. To think. Well, no, of course, everyone will assume on this planet now thinks. Everyone has a nervous system to the point just up to the cerebral cortex, and they can think. We'll just take that as a given. And so you've got to remember that in the 3D world, we're still talking about the polarized nature of everything, including intelligence, which seems to come out in a relative description. And so some people are dependent more on this than others. It's not hard to perceive that. But in a quite real sense, it's as though people in general will keep grasping. In case it wasn't clear, maybe this will bring a little more depth to what I said just a couple of seconds ago. Like this struggle at just an established area that is nice and active in everyone. And that is that you are still striving, attempting to find variations, variety in primary affairs. And it's as though people will keep grasping at that, considering that there was, as I was trying to get you to consider, a kind of symbolic tussle or tug-of-war going on between that, which is well established and we'll assume active in everyone. Between that and what would be pulling at another side is, instead of just continuing to seek variety in primary affairs to expand the secondary world in that nature, which has been done now for thousands and thousands of successful years, it's now directly feeding this, which I'm already suggesting is a different S. Because this is not directly tied to sex. You can screw more or less while being unconscious, right? Well, when drunk enough, you understand. You can eat without particularly thinking about it, because you can read the paper, you can watch a ball game and eat and not even know what you ate. You get through and think, who ate my hot dog? Then you think, my God, I ate my cigar. You didn't know, you were just eating and watching. The original joke was about a guy who walked in and told a psychiatrist that maybe I shouldn't tell him. It was a man who, maybe I should. It was a man who got his cigar confused with his schmuck. It was the joke. You can put it together on your own if you care to. But at any rate, the three S's in a row. Well, the punchline was, my God, I smoked. Well, no. Because I never figured how you got it lit. But anyway. Come on. Calm down, children. What I was trying to point out, that you should be able to see, if you can take the picture, which is not that irrational, between a kind of struggle, a kind of movement of life itself in man, that is a continual, going on constantly, everyone is a participant in it, in your individual life, unless you are just so bored that you're probably going to commit suicide tonight. That you are continuing to seek out, if not very actively, perhaps in a kind of vicarious sense through reading, television, but of trying to expand, that is, new variety, because you can't expand the three basic S's. All you can do is seek for variety. And that's what life has done, and then it got up to the point that like it was four S's. The intellect, and then the need for stimulation. Sex needs sex, sustenance, the need for that, needs food, shelter needs shelter. I mean, they're self-evident what they are. And me calling it the fourth S is the appearance, the active ingredient, the new process, the new operation in man, in you, of this. Sex does not feed this. Food, of course, feeds it indirectly, as it feeds everything we do, the sustenance of just staying alive. But shelter. And don't fall into ordinary psychological, if anybody's about to, kinds of entanglements that where you live affects the way you think. That's true with ordinary people, and etc., except what they think affects where they live. And so don't stop there. The point is, this can operate if it is fed. It can operate while you're living in a lean-to as opposed to a real nice condo. It could, just given basic minimal food requirements, living off berries, it could still think as well as it could if it was having gourmet meals every night. So it is like a separate operation, newer than the other three. But it's as though, in other areas that we've mentioned in different times and different circumstances, it's as though everything new that happens to man on a wide scale, it's the way life operates, but in your individual life. It's easy to find an example, you and everybody, when you're faced with something that's apparently a new responsibility. If it happened at your job, if it happened at your life, as they say, if your lifestyle underwent a serious alteration. Your old lady left you, and you go to pieces like men do as soon as they get out of sight. And you're faced with the possibility, or you got fired on your job if you don't like that one. And it's suddenly a big, almost abrupt jolt in your life, and you're faced with, I got to do something. I got to do something new. What do people, at the ordinary level, what are you inclined to do rather than face up to something new? Now, you may have to because of circumstance, but what are you inclined to do before you have to actually jump in the cold water? That's what I was trying to infer by whining and go to pieces, and nobody seemed to get it. You'll sit around and try and play with that which is already gone. That is, you will try and find some new variety, if nothing else. It's part of the great hold and great power and great sustenance in its own way of memory. That you can sit around and go get yourself a bottle of gin and begin to think about it. And all the good times you had. And how you was just on the verge after these 20 years of asking her, maybe we're to get married. And then she just up and left me. Plus took all my CDs. And it's rather than face up like, well, my God, here I am, I'm only 55. I'll go out and find a single bar for, old farts. Here I am fired after all these years. I'm going to have to go out and get a new job. It's a chance for a new start. People will stop, now I'm exaggerating to try to get you to see this goes on. It may only go like that, but people will go and sit down and go into major funks. They will get drunk. They will remember. They will do almost anything rather than face up with what's new. That's part of the conservative nature of growth in life. There's nothing wrong. There's no psychological flaws in man. But it's as though it happens individually, but I'm trying to get you to see it on a large scale. You should be able to see it rather than me drawing out historical examples, which I could do, but sure that gave you enough to go on. When life moves, it doesn't move just like that. It's too abrupt. It always seems to be a kind of polarization happen, or else something merged and seemed to disappear, but it went into a form of modulation. It just changed keys. But rather than just having to face up, it's just the way energy works. Or if we were childish, it's the way the psychology of man seems to be to help protect him from these abrupt shocks and to make life as disagreeable as it can be. as harsh and stressful, to at least to make it possible for us to get through 60 or 70 years without going absolutely bonkers. So, rather than face up directly, like, well, what I need now is stimulation of this. Rather than that, it's as though people will try almost anything to keep from having to face up to you. If any of you are interested, just an immediate example I'm confronted with since we're doing these tapes and they're being shown around different parts of the country, and I get letters from people. The letters I get, which I do get, from people who've been involved with all sorts of gurus and mystics and all sorts of things. God knows why, but some of them are attracted. They'll find this kind of thing on TV, and they immediately write to me. But a lot of the complaints I get, the notes, they end up as complaints, having to do, well, I'm about had it with talk. Words, words, words. Although I did enjoy your tape. I enjoyed seeing yours but words, words, words. Now, what am I going to do? And they'll whine and they'll cry, and I'll see teardrops in their letters. That I've starved myself. I've traveled here and there, and I've stood on my head, and I've stood on my foot, and I stood on my sister once. No. And what they're saying is there was no abrupt magic, and they're just dismissing talk out of hand, which is nothing new, but they think they've discovered it. Like, well, talk. What are they expecting? Now, I don't mean that in some way that talk itself from us, from me, from anybody, is instant magic. But where are people expected to grow? Now, the kinds of people I'm referring to are back, remember, almost attempting anything that they still dream of. Up-to-date, educated people still dream of, if there is something unusual in life that could be done, if there's something a person could sort of undertake their own evolution, they might even accept some of my general terms, they still believe it has to do with growing a new arm, being able to walk on water, being able to heal the sick, raise the dead, almost anything except nothing new, nothing wrong, but it is outdated. In the struggle that I'm suggesting to you between continuing to seek variety of primary affairs to expand the ordinary, extant, and growing secondary world, the struggle between that and stimulating this, although it's almost as though people will do anything. They don't look at it this way. It's not some kind of conspiracy of stupidity. It's just the way life grows, but it's almost as though they'll do anything rather than go, aha! What I should be doing is feeding this. Of course, once you get on that line, and if you were indeed drawn and quartered, wired and primed enough to be interested in this kind of stuff, then you'd realize that stimulating this itself becomes a subtle art, because just stimulating this with what's available ordinarily is pretty dry pancakes. It just doesn't seem to do it. But people will consider how people will attempt, in case any of this, if you do miss a subtle tug. For instance, if we had fairly ordinary red circuit kinds of centered people will attempt to feed their yellow circuit, good old couch potatoes, laying there, will attempt to feed and to pacify the yellow circuit need by reading TV Guide. It's not an attack on TV Guide, but they will. National Enquirer. Almost anything that it's almost as though they're saying, which they're not. They don't understand it. There's nothing wrong. But it's almost as though they're saying to their intellect, all right. If you're going to growl and make those funny, stomach noises up here, all right, here, read this. And again, no offense to fast food, but as ordinary people would say, it's almost like eating some kind of junk food, and at least, your stomach quits growling for a few seconds. Or, the whole reliable is just inane, trite yammering, just mechanical talk. Just go down to the local bar or turn around to whoever you're living with and just start babbling about sports. It's a great one. No offense to sports, but just babble about How about them Falcons? Can you believe what they've done already in preseason? And you could be in other parts of life's body, wired up to be a kind of critic and go, talk about a waste of time. People starving in the world, some of the tyrannical, repressive regimes still, their hold has not been broken. And these people over here, people with the benefit of a middle class upbringing, a college education, partly at my expense. They got in there on government loans. And they got the nerve to stand here and they spend hours talking about sports. That's just the old standby. Well, of course, there is a super old standby, and that's known as reminiscing. You can do that without anybody there. That is, you and your partner. You reminisce about what kind of guys you are. You reminisce a while, and your partner, then he reminisces. Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah. Hey, can you think of any more stories? At least I have to actually think. Yeah. Hey, wait a minute. I remember. Those of you laughing with a certain tone in your voice, might I suggest have confessed. Even that Cardinal Fang's Catherine wheel, you just gave it up. Well, very specifically, I mentioned memory. We don't have to go into a great historical survey, but tied in with this, a little more general, is you can see it as a kind of resistance. I assume all you can see that no offense, no attack, but faced with anything, ordinarily people resist the new. That's the way life is in man and in other areas, by the way. I don't know how you'd be, but life is that way in ore, in dirt. But with humans, the new, people resist it. The resistance you can also see as, I just kind of hit on, I think we might as well, it might be worthwhile to expand it a little bit for a second. It's almost as though, again, I'm just saying almost as though, because people do not think about it this way and nothing's wrong. It's the way things grow. Except ordinarily the intellect cannot look at this. It never even thinks about it. But it's, again, as though people suddenly confronted with having to think. That is, they should be feeding stimulation to this. The best stimulation possible, like getting the best sex possible. I always like that term, like it was a bad sex. Don't write me and tell me if you know about it. I don't even want to hear about it. What about bad food, better food? But it's as though instead of doing this, it's like suddenly that many people go, wow, wait a minute. And they suddenly have a great renewed interest in something they've already done. Wait a minute. Let's revise. Wait, let's re-examine this. We're not through with this yet. Wait a minute. Too soon we left this. In other words, they're back to a variety, one of the variations that was already going on in which they've been some part or heard about, which is being a part of it, of some form of variety of some of the primary aspects in the ordinary secondary world. But faced with the distinct possibility of suddenly needing to feed good, stimulating food to this, it's like, wait a minute, all right. But first off, we have not completely milked this. It's as though by doing that they can stave off having to feed it. And if any of this sounds strange or didn't make enough sense, it's the love of all past victories. That's why I was talking about you and the conversation between you and the partner sitting around reminiscing. But it's the love of all past victories, the love of all past defeats. It is the intrigue, it is the love, if I may say that. Okay. It is the love of old ideas, which can be defended in the city because people say, well, the old ideas deserve our respect, the old religions, because of their antiquity, because things were better then, because the ideas have survived this long, so obviously they have some intrinsic superior value. But do you understand? I'm not saying that none of them have any value. Forget that. But you understand that there you are, speaking generically, faced with the continual involvement with, the continual being fed by, the expansion in the manner of variety of primary affairs, let's say over here, and then over here is the new, the still blossoming need for the intellect to be stimulated with good food. And you can look back over here and go, wait a minute. There were some great ideas. I mean, I got to tell you the truth. I don't begin to claim that I understand everything, for instance, that Hobbes ever wrote, much less Aristotle. So wait a minute. In other words, I have not fully availed myself of the nectar of ancient wisdom. The old ideas have got to be, if not the best ideas, probably the best available. And who can argue that in the city? Nobody. And of course, you don't have to be involved with philosophy. All you got to be is ordinary, and you just don't like change. My father was against abortion. I'm against abortion. My father was a Democrat. Hell, I'm a Democrat. It doesn't take any effort. It's not right or wrong. It does not take any effort. It does not produce stimulation, which is why it is safe and it is usable for me to continue to make this little temporary sketch and say it's almost as though people will do anything rather than directly confront the stimulating feeding of this. Wait a minute. I know I should do that, and I will. It is on my agenda, but wait a minute. There is so much still over here. There's so much variety. There's so many ideas I've never thought about. There's so many religions that I have never explored completely. I only have one lifetime. So many great ideas. So few brain cells. I mean, so little time. Speaking politically, there is another very ancient note that has been made, and that is variations of this, but it goes something like this. Can I have F diminished? It says that all taxes, which are restrictions, but all taxes ultimately fall upon agriculture. If you'll take that right quick from the apparent fields of politics and the fields of fields, it is pointing at, if one of the three basic S's is really basic, it's got to be what? It's sustenance. Because you might as well face up to it. There are individuals that can go without sex. There are individuals that can go without having a real neat pad. In other words, there are people that can live out in a ditch and not get any. But they got to eat. I assume you see that, speaking back at the external level of what would seem to be political, all taxes, they can tax anything they want to. They can put taxes on services, they can put taxes on automobile accessories. Automobile accessory business can go out. Any service industry can go out. The repair of computers, it can all go out, and all taxes ultimately go back to agriculture. When they're taxed, everything else goes up. You follow. There's no big secret. I didn't think it was. Now consider, though. Now consider that in man's modern world of taxes, which are kinds of restrictions, it's still, once you get outside of what seems to be out here speaking politically, now we're talking about what seems to be the unique world of man's secondary existence, it still must fall upon primary activities, primary energies. For instance, all religions, which is like a shortcut, institutionalized way to say all social norms, the kinds of governing forces, energies that seem to run the city, that run the secondary civilized world of man, what do they tax? They can only tax the basic three. That is, they can only restrict the basic three. What do religions? We're running out, so I'll assume that now you can do this on your own. This is just the crude basic springboard. But our religions, they have to tax the basic three. They can't tax the variations. Well, they can, but it's a waste of time because it all goes back to agriculture, right? No matter who you tax, it goes back to food. That the farmer, whoever is growing food, you or somebody else, there is where all taxes rest. All restrictions, taxes, rest upon the basic three. You could try and tax some variation and say, well, a church could say, well, okay, we're an enlightened, we're a real secondary up-to-date church. Forget all those Judaic Christian ideas of family and marriage, all that. Everybody can have sex with 17 different people if you live to be 52, or if you plan to. You can have sex with 17 people, but at least half of them, at least half, must be somebody of the opposite sex, and at least half of those must not entail pain enough that someone makes an audible noise. They can say that. But you understand, it's a waste of time. That's like saying, well, we're going to tax farm implements. We're going to put a special surtax on tractors. You can do that, but all that does is cause the people using tractors, those growing food, to up the price of food. It's known as the cost of doing business. And so then, the taxes fell back to that. And you may say, well, at least we're not paying those damn old lazy farmers any more of our subsidies. You're an idiot. No, you're an ordinary idiot. All taxes have to go back. All restrictions. All things that seem to want to channel in a certain way the activities of man must go back to agriculture. That is the basic three. So all religions, I'm using that in an archetypical manner, of course, and symbolically, but the religions, they tax, restrict sex, tell you when to have sex, who to have it with or not to have it. Then they'll restrict, in many cases, the next most popular one is food. To be a member of this religion, you got to only eat this kind of food, you can only eat on a certain day and all that. And then a lesser degree, them having to fool with shelter, because that is getting dangerous for you to fool with shelter much, because you got to get in and out of the elements. But they do things like your home should be the sanctity of your particular home, or perhaps you should move from one area over here where this group of which you are a part is where they live. But that's the only thing that they can tax. That is what they restrict. The reason that I've gone this far was try to get you to see that there are almost no taxes whatsoever on the fourth S. Think about it a second. You got a second. Hell, we all got a second. All God's children got a second. But when we get to Akron, I guess we're going to put on our Rolexes and nobody will have a second. Almost no taxes on the fourth S. Well, for instance, I'll start at a very crude level right quick. Even the most fundamentalist churches, our religions in particular, I know there's some little splinter groups that might apparently prove this disingenuous, but the religions themselves will even allow, if they're pushed, they will allow for a certain kind of intellectual doubt. I mean, the Catholic Church, this is a large group, I guess, as conservative as any. I don't know if we need to worry about a national or international playoff between all the major religions about which is the most conservative. I mean, unless you are really hard up for a hobby. But at any rate, the Catholic Church will admit to give some variance to even the priests, people in the hierarchy of the church itself, for some intellectual doubt. They'll let people write in a certain way, but they'll allow for intellectual doubt. Priests, head people, and other religions too, will say, well, it's the nature. They will allow for a kind of intellectual doubt. That is, they don't tax it exactly, so long as It does not interfere with the ritualistic compliance inherent in their teachings regarding the basic three. That, yeah, you can have a little intellectual doubt if you want to. I mean, go back and they'll point out to somebody in their literature, look, great St. Peter or St. somebody. He even said, sometimes I wonder exactly what the nature of so-and-so is. But it didn't stop him from going and giving 10% and praying and doing whatever. Look at that another way. And you might also note, this is a little sketchier, but just it all still fits, that even in very closed, tyrannical governments, they don't like the idea of freedom of thought. But look at it this way. They cannot prove, even a Stalin. They can't really prove. They can bring you in and say, have you been thinking thoughts against Papa Joe? And if you say no, I mean, they might want to try and play some electrical games with your body, but they can't really prove. They can make you go, yeah, or no, I haven't. No, I haven't. That's what I meant to say. And you promise you won't if we let you go and let you live. No, I won't. But the thing is, and this is a crude way of putting it, but I want you to see, it's a kind of graphic description of the gradual, simultaneous existence and growth from the primary to the secondary. It's all humans know that you cannot control what somebody else thinks. That's the way they put it. You can't prove it. If you say, wait a minute, are you thinking naughty thoughts about our government? No. Now, if they don't behave in a way that proves it, they don't prove to be a threat, you can go ahead and kill them just on general principles. But the thing is, you can't prove it. In the same way, the church, you could say, well, they can allow for a certain kind of intellectual doubt, because if you're a smartass, you could say, what choice they got? Tut tut. Try it this way. Let's play again. It's almost as though. Concerning such matters as though, it's almost as though that even in the secondary civilized world, that life through man is still having him treat the brain as an organ still of little consequence. Oh, well, now, other than, of course, the everyday lackluster operation of the brain in the city, and, of course, the necessary brilliant discoveries. Was that confusing? That should have been clear enough. Because I could have built this up and played some kind of devil's advocate to myself and say, well, as we've noted many times, where life is growing is here, right? Yeah. And so humans do think, yeah. But any of you, let's just skip all the BS. Let me just put it to you. Any of you that's ever had what we've been pleased to call revolutionary thought, to think in a place that has no polarity, in a new building site, that, compared to every other thing you ever thought, do I understate it? Do I overstate it to call it lackluster? So everybody does think the couch potato, whose biggest stimulation is reading TV guide. Not just the interest, but don't they have articles that actually, the lowdown on Jane Pauley or somebody? Hey, that's their stimulation. It's not a cheap shot, it's just lackluster. What else can I like that? But I use lackluster and then I threw in. And of course the necessary brilliant discoveries. Because then your mind would want to say, if you're ordinary, you could say, wait a minute. Now I know the world's full of little old people laying around that the most important thing they've ever read is a National Enquirer, and then their lips move and it takes them all a week. You could say that and you could say, yeah, you're right, but how about the Einsteins? How about them? Other than the necessary brilliant discoveries. After he discovered one thing, what else did he do? No attack on Einstein, but it seems to be that there are people in life, and they do. They stand out. History notes them, the Aristotles and etc. But it is a necessary brilliancy. It's one of the dangers of ever finding your intellectual hero or your spiritual hero, ever meeting a hero. I'm not going to make up or bring up examples because life is full of them, but of somebody that seemed to have made a brilliant discovery. It may seem to work for years. I don't mean just walk down the street and went, wow, wait a minute. I just understand there's something smaller than atoms. I'll call them quark. I'm talking about people who spent 20 years faithfully working and seemed to then come up to an abrupt place and made a brilliant discovery. Life needs that. But after those necessary brilliant discoveries, what else is there? I must suggest to you after that, before that, around that, to the left of that, to the side of that, every other thought the man had was National Enquirer thought. It was lackluster. Life needs this kind of brilliant discovery. But it's all lackluster compared to thinking in a way that has no polarity, of thinking in a way that is not feeding the secondary variety of primary affairs, that is true intellectual stimulation. How about a final suggestion or something to consider? Again, could I put it to you this way? It's almost as though that right now the intellect is capable of operating in a way that is too abrupt, to go back to what we were talking about last time. It's almost as though that the intellect inherently, even with ordinary people right now, inherently has the possibility, compared to the red and blue circuits, of operating too abruptly, of being able to get into processional reality and to actually jump in there and cut it up into such instant pieces that it almost becomes to it thing specific. It almost seems to be real periods, which of course it is at that level. But at the same time, it's as though life does that and needs that, but then still has people not understanding it, not being aware of it in this sense, of not having a full confrontation, a full relationship, a full interest in the most stringent kind of intellectual processes possible. They pay lip service. But they will still, what? They will look back this way. They will look at the other side of the tussle, the tug-of-war. They will continue to look to the past. They will look. It's almost as though they're just forcing themselves. Like, I'm going to put this off as far as I can, as long as I can. And what I need is just a little more variety over here in the older, lower regions, in the secondary world as it exists. It's just almost as though the intellect, even at ordinary levels, is just too hot, too abrupt, except perhaps for revolutionists here and there.